Hi students, in this chapter we will discuss about the metals and the non-metals. All the matter that we see around us, we know that it consists of different types of elements. Anything that you see around yourself, we know it consists of different kinds of elements. And these elements can be broadly categorized into two main groups: metals and non-metals. Metals like iron, magnesium, copper, and non-metals like hydrogen, nitrogen, and sulfur. Metals, their properties are different than the non-metals. We will discuss about their properties later on. And there is one more group, right? One more category of the elements. We call them as metalloids. We call them as metalloids. What are the metalloids? The metalloids are those elements which are having the resemblance with the metals and non-metals. Actually, their properties resemble with both metals and non-metals. That's why they are called as metalloids, like silicon, germanium, right? Arsenic. These are the metalloids. If you look at the periodic table, we can just see in this periodic table here, most of the elements are metals, right? You can see these elements, right? This color, okay? These are the metals, and these are non-metals. In between the metals and non-metals, we have the non-metal. We have the metalloids. Okay. About 80% of the elements are metals. So that means most of the elements that we find around us, these are metals, and less number of the elements are non-metals, and very few elements metalloids, but most of the elements are metals. Correct? Now let us discuss about the difference between the metals and the non-metals. Metals, first property is that they are the good conductors of heat and electricity. Correct? So the metals can conduct heat and electricity, whereas non-metals do not. They do not conduct the heat and electricity. Okay. There are certain exceptions also. We'll talk about the exceptions later on. But let's discuss the general properties, right? General differences actually. Okay. Metals, they are good conductors of heat and electricity, whereas non-metals, they don't conduct heat and electricity. Metals, they have high density. So when you take any of these metals in your hand, you will feel heavy, you will feel a heaviness, right? Due to the high density. Okay. Whereas non-metals, you will feel these substances as very much lighter substances, right? Because the density is not very much high. Okay. And the metals, they have very high melting point, high boiling points. Whereas non-metals, they have lower melting and the boiling points, and many of these elements, they exist as the gases, right? Many of these non-metals, they exist as the gases. Some are in the form of solids and some in liquid state. But most of the, or you can say almost all the metals are solids actually, except the mercury, right? We'll discuss about the exceptions later on. So that means the metals, they have high melting point, high boiling point, and non-metals, you can say their melting point and the boiling point is low. Metal, there's you can draw the metals into different shapes by hammering. Correct? By hammering, you can change the shape of the metals into the sheets or in wires. This property is called as the malleability and ductility, right? So that means metals are malleable and metals are ductile. Malleable means, you know, when you can draw them into sheets or in the different shapes, correct? So that's the malleable. And ductile means you can draw them into wires. Whereas, you know, non-metals are not malleable or ductile. They are brittle. Solid non-metals, right? Okay. Metals, they are sonorous. You know, when a metal is struck with some hard substance, it produces noise, okay? Sound is produced there, okay? While as non-metals do not, correct? They are not sonorous. No, metals here, they look shiny when polished, while as non-metals, they look dull in the solid state. And the most important difference between the metals and non-metals is that metals generally lose electrons and therefore they form the positive ions, they form the cations. Okay, they form the positively charged ions called as cations. They lose electrons, right? They have a natural tendency to lose electrons. Like sodium, it changes to sodium plus, magnesium into Mg2 plus, iron into iron 2 plus or iron 3 plus, like that. While as the non-metals, you know, their natural tendency is that they gain electrons and they form negative ions called as anions, right? So when they react, they, in a chemical reaction, the non-metals, they gain electrons and form anions, while as metals, they form cations, they lose electrons, which means that metals have high tendency to lose electrons and non-metals have a higher tendency to gain the electrons. Now these are certain differences between the metals and non-metals. Is there any difference? Is there any exception, right? Is there any exception to these properties? Yes, there are certain exceptions to these different properties that we have discussed so far. Like we said, you know, the metals, they are hard solids, right? Okay. While as there are certain metals which you can cut them in with the knife, so they are soft. Some of the metals are soft also, right? Like sodium and the potassium. Okay. Not all the metals are hard solids. Some of them are soft. And mercury is not solid at room temperature. It is liquid. It's in the liquid state. So this is another exception, right? Okay. Next point, we say that the metals, they lose electrons, while as non-metals, they gain electrons, right? This last property we were discussing. Non-metals, they form anions. Hydrogen is a non-metal, okay, but it generally forms the H plus like the metals. It generally loses electrons, right? It has a tendency to lose electron actually, just like the metals. Okay, fine. One more property, one more difference, one more exception here. The first one, we discussed that the metals, they are the good conductors of heat and electricity, while as the non-metals do not conduct electricity, right? But carbon is a non-metal and one of its allotropic form, the graphite, right? Okay, it can conduct electricity, right? Right? So it can conduct electricity. So this is an exception, isn't it? We say in general non-metals do not conduct electricity, but graphite, which is an allotropic form of a carbon, okay, is a good conductor of electricity. Why? Because we know that it has a one free electron there, right? In the graphite, only 3 valence, you know, the carbon is bonded with, other 3 carbon atoms covalently, right? So that's why it can conduct electricity. So that's a different topic, correct? We can discuss it in the next lesson. Similarly, non-metals, they are not hard substances, okay, they have very low density, but diamond, which is an allotropic form of a carbon, is actually the hardest substance, right? It's very hard, it has a very high melting point, okay, it has a very high. This is another exception. We generally say that non-metals, they have very low melting points, but diamond, which is an allotropic form of a carbon, has a high melting point. Hope you got the concept. Thanks for watching the video. Bye for now.